our Esslers, or this is our school mission and principle. Yeah, that's exactly what happens to me in the grant-making office. And I usually don't expect the executive director of the Walton Foundation to do that, but in fact, they do that. So anyhow, I want you to know that these things, aspiring to these principles, has not been easy. In fact, for me, on a personal level, it's been over the course of 15, 16 years. And Susan will tell you, I was far from honing in and being able to articulate these principles early on. And I'm interjecting that here at this second principle of grit, because oftentimes we tell kids, I've heard this in two different camps. You have some kids that come in with this lived experience, whether they're from East Oakland or they're from 24th and Mission, or and they have this real articulate consciousness that you're like, holy cow, like, where did you get that from? And some of us who have a level of consciousness that work with these young kids, either directly or indirectly, we're telling them, we're working with them to show them how to hold their ground, how to stand their ground, how to hold those values. And oftentimes, where they fall short and where we fall short is how to negotiate new spaces, how to relent a little bit, and knowing which battles to pick, and actually, again, having them see us know when to relent a little bit, right? Because this, as anyone knows and experiences growth, it's not this smooth, continuous arc. There are times when you just got to pull back and regroup and build with those for whom you may not have built rapport with. And so, yes, we want our kids to have more time on task. Yes, we want kids to be able to problem solve with some Eurocentric test, or we don't want to hone in on those things as much. It's more about us as adults, again, modeling, demonstrating for them what it's like to work through situations where even as adults, all the time, we want to give up. We want to walk away. We want to shut down. And so, again, it's important for us to model that. I had this conversation recently with one of my teachers who loves to start off her unit with, popular hip-hop line, or integrate a lot of, contemporary music in movies and things like that. And it's a familiar space for her. And I know that she uses that as a way to just frame the context for the work, right? And then within that work, sometimes as we see kids kind of doze off a little bit, or they lose a little bit of focus, we want them to kind of, hunker down and re-engage and that kind of thing. But again, I think that's an important moment for my teacher. We were just having this conversation about what it would be like for her to introduce one of these units with a text or a passage from an author that she's completely unfamiliar with, a genre that she's unfamiliar with. And don't throw anything at me, but if it's something from the canon, for example, that oftentimes we put on the back burner, or it's something that we do in some literary analysis to compare and contrast. We spend 4 days on, Her Eyes Are Watching God, and 1 week on 5 different pieces in the canon. And I love Zora, but you got to understand that if we want to see kids struggle with something difficult, again, we've got to show them that we're willing to do that as well. And then they'll engage in even the more difficult texts that they're not even engaging in from authors. And I'm using authors because I taught English, but even from authors from whom are writing their narrative. It's tough for kids to struggle with a Toni Morrison piece now. The text is too complex for them. And it's because we're giving them text that it just isn't that complex anymore. And so I think, again, if we want kids to be gritty, if we want to see kids deal with those pieces, like when I read Baldwin, it doesn't matter how many times I read Baldwin, his message is so deep and so complex that each time I read it differently. But it's only through struggling with other texts that I now have the tools to deal with that now. And it wasn't for any high school or maybe even some of my college teachers that told me, deal with this difficult text. So a friend of mine, a writer friend of mine, said to me, he goes out and looks for authors that he hates, authors that he's expecting to write some shitty piece. And that's how he brings that analysis then to his own work. And so because I'm always like, dude, here's my list of things that I'm reading. And it's like, it's expected. You kind of just go through that. And it's like, and we know this intellectually. We know that that's where growth happens for us when we're stretching ourselves. But we're sometimes too embarrassed or too shameful to do that with kids in the moment. In that second unit or third unit when we're like in October or November, and it's like when you want to like pump the brakes a little bit, you know, I think that's when the kids are saying, challenge us. But I think what they're really saying is challenge yourself. Right? Okay, so that's, again, it's just a part of us as intellectuals having that conversation with one another. And finally,